My name is Mara Ellington, 34 years old. The coffee hit my scalp like a swarm of hornets, scalding, relentless, the sting sliding down my neck in bitter rivulets, while I folded in on myself on the kitchen tiles and tried not to scream. Austin stood over me, with the empty mug like a hunter admiring his aim, and beside him his mother Claudia clapped once, as if I were a scene she'd waited to binge. The humiliation was worse than the burn. I could taste it in the back of my throat, metallic, shameful, familiar. Beyond the haze, I saw my son, Riker, small legs tucked under a chair, hands wrapped around his own cup of coffee that was mostly warm milk and pretending. His eyes were huge and lucid, far older than 6. Something changed in them. It was the same soundless click I'd felt years ago when the first boundary slid and I told myself love would fix it. Riker stood. To understand why a man could look at his wife and choose ruin, I need to go back to the beginning. Before the mortgage notices and the bruises in places cardigans could hide, back to the day I mistook neediness for devotion. I was strong, or I thought I was. I had a corner office in Seattle, spreadsheets that bent to my will, and a calendar full of people who said my name with respect. The coffee shop was an accident. A rain-soaked Tuesday, a ruined umbrella, and an order called twice with no takers. You can have it if you want, he said, sliding the extra latte across the counter like a dare. Austin Peter had the kind of smile that confessed and promised at once, handsome in a work boot way, rough around the edges, a break from the bland men who calculated their laughter. He told me he worked construction, talked about a future company like he could already see the trucks with his name on the doors. You're too good for a guy like me, he said, shrugging, but I'll wake up every day trying to deserve you. That line should have been a flare in a dark sky. Instead, I cupped it to my chest like warmth. I mistook his self-abasement for humility. I mistook my urge to rescue for love. I didn't notice, not right away, how every compliment had a hook. 3 months in, I missed a dinner reservation because a client merger caught fire at 6 p.m. He appeared at my office door unannounced, leaning against the frame like he owned the building. "Babe, you missed our night." The words were soft. The eyes weren't. I apologized, promised tomorrow, and he smiled without his eyes again. Sometimes I wonder if your career is more important than us. The sentence hovered like a wasp. I swatted it with guilt. I closed my laptop and followed him out while unread emails multiplied like bacteria. The next morning, I paid in credibility. That night, he paid me in worship, kisses, dinner, a dozen assurances that I mattered more than any spreadsheet. I took the bait and called it balance. The pattern formed like sediment. Small compromises layered until they hardened into a cliff I didn't know I was standing on. He pouted when I worked late, sulked when I met friends, discovered a crisis every time I had something important. "I just need you, Mara," he'd whisper into my hair. "You're all I have." It felt like devotion until I realized how empty my own orbit had become. Then my parents died in a car crash, and grief shelled me. He moved in through the cracks, gentle, so helpful it felt like mercy. He pressed the conversation about combined finances as if it were romance. "What's mine is yours," he murmured. On our honeymoon, sun gilding his lashes. The idea of family wrapped around my loneliness like a warm coat. I signed papers without reading footers. The inheritance became numbers in his mouth. Investment, seed money, startup. I watched them drain from my account the way a person watches a tide, surprised every time it doesn't return. The first slap didn't come like thunder. It came like weather changing, gradual, inevitable. I asked about the missing money, about jobs that never materialized, about bills stamped overdue. His voice escalated, then softened mid-accusation. "Are you calling me a failure?" A minute later, his hand broke the air. The sound echoed through our apartment, and silence rushed in. He cried afterward, the kind of tears that wet your shirt and confuse your brain. "Look what you made me do," he whispered into my neck. "I'm sorry. I'll be better." The bruise on my cheek faded in 5 days. The apology lasted 3 weeks. Then came the test strip with its quiet pink plus. "This is perfect," he said, holding my shaking hands. "Now you can be a real mom. Quit the job." I loved my job. I love the identity that came with my nameplate and the exhilaration of my work. We need my income, I said, voice careful. His face shuddered. So I can't provide for my family? He paced our small living room, words landing like little cuts. My own wife thinks I'm not a man. He didn't hit me then. He didn't have to. He built a cage out of sentences and waited for me to climb in. By the end of the week, I'd type my resignation through tears. Without my salary, the world got smaller. He wanted dinner at 6, floors that gleamed, a newborn who never cried, a wife who worshipped. When I freelanced to keep the lights on, he tolerated it like a hobby. I work all day, he'd say, cracking a beer. Have dinner ready. Claudia appeared like a storm front, sharp cheekbones, sharper comments. Part-time nonsense, she called my consulting, dropping the words like peanut shells on my floor. Austin needs a wife who supports him properly. I learned the angles of her mouth when she was disappointed. They were the angles of a trap. When Riker arrived, I thought it would redeem us. Babies do that in movies. Teach fathers patience, soften rough edges. Austin found new edges. You're holding him wrong, he'd say. He's crying because you don't know what you're doing. He insisted he worked all day just as I caught him staring at nothing in his truck for an hour. The first time he grabbed my wrist, it hurt less than the shock. The first time he left fingerprint bruises on my upper arms, I said I bumped a cabinet. I bought concealer. I learned to wear sleeves in July. Claudia's demands slithered into our mailbox like bills. Property taxes, car repairs, medical emergencies, always due Friday. I became a number machine, taking 3 extra projects, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, sleeping in increments. It's about time, she said when I handed over $3,000 I didn't have to spare. I was starting to worry you didn't understand family loyalty. Austin watched me, the way a coach watches a player hustle for a ball. He doesn't want to chase himself. Through it all, Riker watched. At 2, he flinched at loud voices. At 4, he woke from nightmares that smelled like beer and rage. I held him while he cried, a bruise blooming under my sweater like a secret. Mommy's here, I'd whisper, promising things I wasn't sure I could keep. Guilt grew in me like ivy. Love did too, but it learned how to move around the guilt. The morning, everything snapped, glittered with ordinary. I made coffee, always coffee, for the man who needed caffeine and the boy who wanted to pretend. Austin scrolled his phone, narrating a supervisor's slight like a Greek tragedy. Claudia arrived at precisely 9:15, perfume announcing itself before her voice. She sat at my table like she paid the mortgage, produced a crumpled envelope, and declared foreclosure unless $15,000 appeared by Friday. The number turned my stomach. We don't have it, I said, steady for once. There was a silence that hummed. Austin stood, the shape of his anger familiar as furniture. Can't or won't, he asked. My record of 2 years' help sat like a ledger in my memory. $20,000 siphoned to emergencies that never ended. I said it out loud. The air went purple. How dare you disrespect me in front of my mother, he whispered, which meant he was about to perform. Riker stared, knuckles whitening around his cup. I stepped back until the counter pressed cold into my spine. Austin reached for the mug. He tilted it with a precision that told me everything. He'd done the geometry in his head. Angle, arc, splashback, avoiding his skin while maximizing mine. When the coffee hit, the world narrowed to heat and Claudia's laugh. I dropped to my knees and smelled burned hair and the lemon cleaner I'd used an hour before. Austin kept talking. Something about wives and lessons. His voice came from far away, like a radio in another room. Then the chair legs scraped. Riker's small shoes hit tile. I croaked his name. He didn't run. He climbed onto his chair and then the table, that thin body moving with mission. Austin's smirk shifted to confusion. Riker, get down, he said. And in that half second, my son lifted his mug and let the warm, milky coffee cascade over his father's head. Silence took the kitchen hostage. A drop ticked from Austin's chin to the floor. Claudia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Riker's voice was steady, a small bell in a cavern. How does that feel, Daddy? Does it hurt? Austin's shock curdled to a rage that made the room colder. He lunged. Riker was already moving, off the table, around the island, my phone in his hand, like a torch. 911, he said, breath high but clear, feet pounding toward the back door. My daddy hurt my mommy. He poured hot coffee on her head and it burned her. We live at 247 Maple Street. Please send help. Austin froze between fight and flight. A siren was suddenly imaginable in the distance, in the blank space between heartbeats. The power in the room shifted, not to me, not yet, but to the small boy who refused to learn our house's worst lesson. Outside, a neighbor's wind chime started up, bright and ridiculous. Claudia whispered, "Austin," in a tone I'd never heard from her, thin, scared. He looked at his arms as if the skin could testify, unburned, careful, deliberate. I pushed myself upright, scalp blazing, and for the first time in years, my voice didn't shake. "You did this," I said. He flinched, like words could bruise. Somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, my son's shoes drummed across grass toward help. And in the space his courage made, something in me, that had been dying for years, stood up. The sirens began as a faint hum, a thread weaving through the morning air. My scalp still burned, each heartbeat sending waves of fire across my skin. But the sound of approaching help anchored me. Austin paced like a caged animal, his eyes darting toward the door, the window, the mug still wet in his hand. Claudia sat rigid at the table, her fingers knotted, her usual composure cracked. For once, she had no barbed comment, no disdainful laugh. She just looked afraid. Riker's small voice echoed from outside, carried through the open back door. "Mrs. Ashton, please help my mommy." His words cut through me, fear and pride tangling until I could barely breathe. He was out there, my little boy, defying the man who had terrorized us for years. Austin spun toward me, his face twisted. "Look what you made him do," he hissed. "You've poisoned him against me." I pressed a hand against the counter to steady myself. My voice came out raw but steady. "He sees you, Austin. He's always seen you. You can't hide from him anymore." The flash of panic in his eyes was brief but real. He heard the sirens now too, closer, undeniable. He turned toward the door as though calculating if he could catch Riker before the neighbors, before the police. But the sound of multiple voices outside, the Ashtons, concerned and calling, rooted him to the kitchen floor. For the first time, Austin seemed smaller than the room he had once dominated. Claudia finally found her voice, though it was sharp with fear. "Austin, sit down. Don't make this worse. We'll call the lawyer. We'll explain." "Explain what?" I cut in, surprising even myself with the steel in my tone. My hand shook, but my words didn't. "That you laughed while your son poured boiling coffee on his wife? That you taught him abuse is a lesson, not a crime?" Claudia's mouth tightened, but her eyes betrayed her. She looked cornered, her cruelty stripped bare and useless in the face of sirens and witnesses. The front door burst open a moment later, swinging wide without a knock. Mrs. Ashton swept in, her arm protectively around Riker, her face pale but fierce. Behind her came Tom Ashton, broader and angrier than I'd ever seen him. And then the police, 2 officers, 1 woman with kind eyes, 1 younger man already scanning the room like a hawk. "Mara Ellington?" the woman asked, her voice careful but firm. "Yes," I rasped, lifting my chin. "Ma'am, we received a call about a domestic assault. Are you injured?" Riker slipped from Mrs. Ashton's grip and ran to me, his arms flung around my waist. "Mommy, I told them everything," he whispered fiercely. "They're here now." My knees nearly buckled, but I held him tight. "You were so brave," I whispered into his hair, the words tasting like salvation. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here," the younger officer said to Austin, already gesturing toward the side of the room. Austin's mask slipped back on, the one I'd seen him wear at parties, with neighbors, with anyone who might suspect. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "My wife and I were arguing, and the coffee—" "Don't lie!" Riker's voice rang out, high and clear. He pointed at his father with a trembling hand. "I saw you throw it on her head. You did it on purpose, and Grandma laughed." Every eye in the room swung to Claudia. She froze, her lips parting in a useless protest. "The child is confused," she said quickly. "He's upset." "I'm not confused." Riker's small chest heaved, but his voice didn't falter. "Daddy hurts Mommy all the time. He pushes her. He yells. He grabs her arms. He makes her cry when she doesn't give Grandma money." Silence followed, heavy as stone. The female officer knelt to Riker's level. Sweetheart, can you tell me more about that? When Mommy says she can't give Grandma money, Daddy gets mad and hurts her. Sometimes he leaves marks. Riker turned to me, urgency in his eyes. Tell them, Mommy. Show them. I swallowed hard and slowly rolled up my sleeve. The faint yellow-green bloom of a fading bruise on my upper arm spoke for me. The room seemed to tilt with the weight of it. The officer stood, her expression grim. Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention for those burns, and we'll need a full statement. Before I could speak, Riker tugged her sleeve. I have proof, he said solemnly. Proof? She asked gently. He pulled my phone from his pocket, holding it like treasure. I took pictures. When Daddy hurt Mommy. I hid them in a special folder. I called it evidence. The officer blinked, then took the phone carefully. She scrolled through the images, her face tightening with each swipe. These are recent? Yes, Riker said. I made sure they didn't get lost. Austin surged forward, desperation breaking through his practice mask. Give me that phone, you little brat. Tom Ashton stepped between them with sudden menace. Not a chance, he said, his voice low and final. The younger officer moved quickly, snapping cuffs onto Austin's wrists before he could protest. Sir, you need to calm down. This is all lies, Austin spat, struggling. She turned my son against me. You did this, I said quietly, cutting across his roar. My voice shook, but it carried. Every bruise, every scar, every scream, you did this, and now it's over. The sirens had stopped outside. Red and blue lights pulsed against the window glass, a strange kind of heartbeat. Claudia slumped back into her chair, pale and trembling, while Austin fought against the cuffs like a trapped animal. And in the middle of it all stood Riker, small, determined, his eyes locked on mine. For the first time, I believed we might actually be free. The kitchen felt like a stage stripped bare, harsh light through the blinds, burnt coffee staining the tiles, the acrid smell of my own skin still clinging to the air. Austin thrashed once more against the cuffs, his breath coming in short bursts of rage, but the fight was draining out of him. The uniformed officers had replaced his kingdom with rules he couldn't bend. Claudia rose from her chair, her hands trembling as she adjusted her pearls. This is outrageous, she snapped, though her voice cracked. You can't arrest a man in his own home for an accident. And me? I didn't touch her. Mrs. Ashton cut in, her voice steady and merciless. You laughed. We saw you through the window. You enjoyed it. Tom nodded behind her, arms crossed like a wall. You're as guilty as he is. The female officer's eyes sharpened. Ma'am, I'll need you to come with us as well. Encouraging and witnessing an assault without intervening makes you complicit. Claudia's face drained of color. You can't be serious, she whispered, the edges of her composure shattering. I am, the officer replied flatly, pulling a second pair of cuffs from her belt. For once, Claudia's sharp tongue had no words. She sputtered, then sat back down as if the chair itself might shield her. Riker slipped his small hand into mine. It's okay, Mommy, he whispered. His palm was sweaty but firm. They can't hurt us anymore. I looked down at him, at the fierce determination in eyes too young to know so much. You saved me, I whispered back, my throat closing around the words. The younger officer read Austin his rights, each phrase a nail in the coffin of his control. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Austin sneered at me as the words rolled on. You think this is over, Mara? His voice was low, poisonous. You just destroyed our family. Riker will hate you for this. But Riker didn't flinch. He took a step forward, chin raised, his voice clear as glass. No, Daddy, I hate what you did to Mommy. The room went still. Even Claudia's shallow breaths faltered. Austin lunged like he might close the distance despite the cuffs, but the officers were ready, holding him firm. His rage turned inward, his eyes darting wildly, as though searching for an escape route in walls that no longer obeyed him. The female officer bent slightly toward me. Ma'am, we'll need to get you to a paramedic for those burns. Do you feel safe leaving the house right now? Safe. The word tasted foreign. I pressed a shaking hand to the back of my neck, where skin throbbed with blisters. Yes, I said softly, then louder, yes, I want to go. Tom Ashton placed a steady hand on his wife's shoulder, but his eyes locked on me. We'll stay with the house. No one's going to touch it until you're ready. The kindness nearly undid me. For years, I'd been invisible in my own neighborhood. Now here they were, stepping into the silence I had carried alone. "Mara," Claudia's voice cracked across the room, desperate now. "Don't let them do this. You know Austin didn't mean—" My gaze cut her off. Years of swallowed retorts, silenced truths, bruises hidden under sweaters, all of it condensed into one look. "You laughed," I said. My voice was flat, final. "That's all anyone needs to know." Claudia shut her mouth. As the officers guided Austin and his mother toward the door, the last fragments of his empire clattered to the floor like broken china. The man who had lorded over every corner of this house, who had turned my life into a cage, shuffled out in handcuffs. Claudia followed, no longer regal, no longer venomous, just small. The sirens outside had quieted, leaving only the distant chatter of radios. Through the open door, I saw neighbors gathering on lawns, their faces pale with shock and curiosity. But I didn't care. For once, their stares felt like protection, not judgment. Riker pressed close to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are we really safe now?" I crouched, ignoring the sting in my scalp, and cupped his face in both hands. "We're safer than we've ever been," I said, and this time I believed myself. The female officer touched my shoulder gently. "Let's get you checked out, ma'am, and then we'll take your full statement. We'll need all the details." Details. I had them. Every bruise, every withdrawal, every demand from Claudia scribbled in my consulting ledgers. For years, I'd written everything down to make sense of the chaos. I hadn't known I was building a record. As they led us outside, the morning air hit me like a baptism. Cool, sharp, almost clean. My scalp still burned, my hands still shook, but inside me something long buried stirred. Hope, small but alive. But Riker walked beside me, his little shoulders squared, his fingers tight around mine. His bravery had cracked something wide open. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was my witness, my ally, my anchor to a life beyond fear. The ambulance doors opened, and for the first time in 6 years, I stepped into a vehicle not as someone's possession or prisoner, but as a survivor, finally heading toward the truth. The fluorescent lights inside the ambulance were too bright, sterile, unforgiving. They made every raw patch on my scalp ache more. Every bruise on my arms seemed darker. A paramedic with kind eyes and latex gloves examined me gently, murmuring instructions I barely processed. "Second-degree burns. We'll clean and dress these. You'll need follow-up care." His voice was calm, steady, as if he'd said the same words 100 times before. Riker sat on the bench beside me, his small legs swinging nervously. His hand gripped mine so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I tried to reassure him with a squeeze, but it was he who radiated strength. "You don't have to be brave anymore, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm not being brave," he said simply. "I'm just telling the truth." The words speared through me. I had spent years hiding the truth, tucking it behind excuses and concealer. My 6-year-old had cut through the lies in one afternoon. Outside, I could still hear the low murmur of police radios and the shuffle of officers escorting Austin and Claudia to waiting cruisers. Austin's voice barked once, hoarse and furious, before the sound of a car door slamming silenced him. Claudia's protests trailed after, brittle and panicked, but they were muffled quickly as the car pulled away. The paramedic finished bandaging my scalp, his hands gentle. "You'll be okay," he said, meeting my eyes. "This isn't the worst injury I've treated, but it's one of the clearest cases I've seen. The evidence is all over you. Don't doubt for a second. You'll be believed." Believed. I clutched the word like a lifeline. The ambulance ride to the hospital blurred into a haze of sirens and antiseptic smell. Nurses met us at the door, their faces brisk but sympathetic. Riker refused to leave my side, his hands still tangled with mine as we were led to a small exam room. The female officer, Andrea, she'd introduced herself earlier, stepped in after a few minutes. She held my phone in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "Mrs. Ellington," she said softly, "I've seen the photos your son took. They're damning. And your financial records." She set the envelope on the counter. "You've been documenting everything, haven't you?" I nodded, weary but resolute. It was the only way I could keep my sanity. Numbers don't lie, even when people do. Andrea's eyes softened. "Those records will help us build a case, not just for assault, but for financial abuse, fraud, maybe more. Your husband and his mother have been bleeding you dry. We can prove it." Riker perked up beside me. I told you, Mommy, the truth is better than being scared. Andrea crouched down to his level. You're very brave, Riker. What you did today, calling us, taking those pictures, that was heroic. He tilted his head, considering. I just wanted to protect Mommy. Tears stung my eyes. I brushed them away quickly, but Andrea noticed. You don't need to apologize for crying, she said gently. You've been surviving. Now it's time to start living again. A knock interrupted us. Mrs. Ashton stepped into the room, her face lined with concern. I hope I'm not intruding, she said. I just wanted to check on you both. We're right outside if you need anything. I swallowed hard. You've already done so much. You opened the door when my son came running. You called for help. She shook her head firmly. That boy saved you. We just answered the call. You're not alone anymore, Mara. Not now, not ever again. Her words cracked something open in me. For years, I had believed isolation was my destiny, that no one would ever see behind the polished front I was forced to wear. Now here was a neighbor, a woman who had been watching from a distance, stepping in when it mattered most. When she left, Riker climbed into my lap, careful of the bandages. He pressed his cheek against my chest. We're going to be okay now, right? I kissed the top of his head, inhaling the scent of soap and bravery. Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to be free. Andrea's voice cut through, firm but kind. I'll need a detailed statement from you soon, but for now, rest. We've got Austin in custody, and Claudia too. The wheels of justice are turning. Justice. I rolled the word in my mind, unfamiliar and sharp. For the first time in years, the future felt possible. As the hospital room quieted, I realized something astonishing. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It didn't feel like the pause before another outburst, another slap, another demand for money I didn't have. It felt like space. Space to breathe, to heal, to rebuild. I tightened my arms around Riker and closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of his breathing anchor me. The past 6 years had been a prison, but now the bars were bent, the door unlocked, and beyond it stretched a life I had almost forgotten I could claim. The hospital room dimmed as evening settled, shadows stretching across the pale walls. I sat propped against thin pillows, Riker curled beside me on the narrow bed. His thumb rubbed the edge of my bandage absent-mindedly, like touching proof that I was real, still here. My chest tightened, gratitude and guilt twisting together. A soft knock announced Officer Andrea again. She carried a clipboard this time, but her eyes softened when they landed on Riker. He's a fighter, she murmured. He's the reason I'm alive, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. She pulled a chair closer. Mara, we've been digging further. Your son mentioned papers on your computer, financial records. Would you be willing to let us collect them? I nodded. Every payment Claudia demanded, every time Austin threatened, I wrote it down. I didn't realize I was building a case. I just needed proof for myself. Proof I wasn't crazy. Andrea gave a small, approving smile. That proof could mean felony charges, extortion, fraud, domestic abuse aggravated by financial coercion. She leaned in, lowering her voice. You're not just a victim, Mara. You're the key witness in dismantling everything they built on your back. The words hit me like cold water, clarifying, terrifying. I wasn't just escaping, I was exposing. Riker stirred beside me. I can help too, he said drowsily, his small voice determined. I hid more pictures in Mommy's computer. I wanted to make sure Daddy couldn't erase them. Andrea's eyes flickered with awe. You're braver than most adults I meet, she told him softly. The door creaked open again, and to my shock, my sister Jean rushed in, her eyes rimmed with red. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since Austin quietly poisoned every line of communication between us. She froze at the sight of me, bandaged and weary, then crossed the room in 2 strides. Mara. Her voice cracked as she folded me into her arms, careful not to jostle my injuries. I should have fought harder to stay in touch. I knew something was wrong, but I let him push me away. The dam inside me broke. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I thought I was protecting you. He said you didn't care, that you looked down on me. Never, she said fiercely. She pulled back just enough to cut my face in her hands. Never believe that again. You are my sister, and I'm here now. You're not going through this alone. Riker blinked up at her, cautious but curious. Are you Mommy's sister? Jean smiled through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, and I'm your aunt. I've missed you both more than I can say. He leaned into her cautiously, then fully, resting his head against her shoulder. Watching him trust her so quickly after everything he had endured cracked something open in me. Maybe trust wasn't gone forever. Maybe it could be rebuilt, brick by fragile brick. Andrea cleared her throat gently. I'll let you reunite. Tomorrow, Mara, we'll start with your formal statement. Tonight, rest. Let your family hold you. She left, closing the door softly behind her. For a long time, silence settled. Not the suffocating silence of waiting for Austin's footsteps or Claudia's criticisms, but a new kind, thick with possibility. Jean sat on the edge of the bed, her hand covering mine. You're going to get through this, she said. And when you're ready, we'll rebuild everything he tried to take. I looked at Riker, asleep now, his small chest rising and falling against my side. We already started, I whispered. The moment he picked up that phone, we started. Jean squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. Then we finished it together. For the first time in years, I believed her. Morning light slipped through the hospital blinds, a softer brightness than the fluorescent glare of the night before. I woke to the weight of a small hand resting across my ribs. Riker sprawled sideways, still deep in sleep. His face was relaxed, the furrows of fear that had aged him far too young finally smoothed. Jean was in the chair by the window, a paper cup of coffee in her hands. She looked exhausted, but her eyes softened when they met mine. You scared me, she whispered. But you're safe now, really safe. Safe. The word felt fragile, like a bird perched in my chest, ready to fly at the first loud sound. A knock interrupted us. Officer Andrea entered with a detective I hadn't met before, a man with dark circles under his eyes and a notebook already open. Mrs. Ellington, Andrea said gently, we need to go over your statement today while everything is fresh. It will be long and it might be painful, but it's the next step. I nodded, bracing myself. I'll do it. Riker stirred at the voices, rubbing his eyes. Mommy, what's happening? We're just telling the truth, I said, smoothing his hair. The truth will help keep us safe. Andrea crouched beside him again. Do you remember the folder you made on your mom's phone? Evidence? Riker nodded solemnly. That was incredibly important, she said. Because of you, we already have charges strong enough to hold your father and grandmother without bail. His eyes widened. Really? Really, Andrea confirmed. But if you want, you can also tell us in your own words, only if you feel ready. Riker leaned against me, his voice muffled in my shirt. I want to. I don't want Daddy to hurt Mommy anymore. Jean's hand found my shoulder, steady and warm. The detective sat, pen poised. Let's start at the beginning, he said. Tell us when you first noticed things weren't right. I took a deep breath, the memories pressing like stones on my chest. The coffee shop, the crooked smile, the way Austin had made me feel like a savior instead of a woman. I told them everything. As the words spilled out, I realized how much I had buried. The late nights he resented, the inheritance that evaporated into business ventures, the first slap disguised as a mistake. Each detail felt like lifting a stone off my chest, exposing the rot beneath. When I faltered, Jean squeezed my hand. When I choked on the memory of Claudia sneering, part-time nonsense, Andrea's eyes anchored me, reminding me that I was no longer invisible. Riker listened in silence until I reached the night Austin twisted my wrist for daring to feed him reheated dinner. I took pictures that time, he said suddenly. When Mommy was asleep, I was scared they'd go away. The detective's pen didn't pause. You're very brave, he said quietly. Riker shrugged, but pride flickered across his face. By the time I finished, my throat was raw. Andrea closed her notebook, her expression both grim and resolute. This is more than domestic violence. It's a pattern of financial exploitation, coercion, and emotional abuse. With the evidence you've kept, we can pursue fraud and conspiracy charges too. This isn't just about what happened yesterday. It's about years of systematic harm. Years. The word made me shiver. Years lost, stolen, carved out of me, but also years that could still be reclaimed. Jean reached for Riker, pulling him gently into her lap. You're safe now, she whispered into his hair. You and your mom both. Andrea stood. We'll move quickly. Your husband won't get the chance to intimidate you again. For the first time in years, I felt the faintest flicker of control returning to my life. Not power in the way Austin had wielded it, violent, selfish, but something quieter, a choice, a voice. As Andrea and the detective left, Jean turned to me, her eyes fierce. When this is over, Mara, you're not just going to survive. You're going to live. I looked down at my son, safe in my sister's arms, and whispered, "We already started." The hospital discharged me 2 days later, scalp bandaged, arms dotted with bruises I no longer bothered to hide. Jean had already packed a bag for me from the house, clothes, toiletries, Riker's favorite stuffed bear, but not a single thing that carried Austin's shadow. "We'll go back for more when it's safe," she said firmly. "For now, you have what matters." Riker clutched his bear-like armor as we stepped outside. The air smelled like rain and gasoline, a mixture strangely cleansing. No Austin waiting in the car, no Claudia perched on the porch, just space. Officer Andrea met us at the curb. "We've obtained a search warrant for your home," she told me. "Anything that ties them to fraud or abuse, we'll find it. You don't need to step foot inside until you're ready." The relief that flooded me was almost dizzying. "Thank you," I whispered. Riker piped up, serious as a judge. "Did you check Daddy's truck? That's where the secret phone is." Andrea's mouth curved slightly. "We did. You were right. There were messages, lots of them. He wasn't just hiding money, Mara. He was hiding another life." My stomach clenched. Part of me had known, his late nights, his mysterious absences, but hearing it confirmed was a wound all its own. Still, instead of breaking me, the knowledge steeled me. Every lie he told had been another brick in the wall I was now free to tear down. Jean guided us to her car, her hand steady on my shoulder. "We'll go to my place in Portland," she said. "It's small, but it's safe." The drive felt endless, highway lines blurring into streaks of white and yellow. Riker fell asleep in the back seat, his bear pressed to his cheek. I turned to Jean, my voice low. "He's seen too much. How do I undo that?" "You don't," she said softly, eyes fixed on the road. "You help him turn it into strength, and you forgive yourself for not being able to shield him from everything." I stared out the window, the landscape shifting from city sprawl to stretches of green. Forgive myself. The words clanged in my chest, unfamiliar, almost impossible. By the time we reached her apartment, dusk had settled. Jean's place was cozy, warm light spilling across soft furniture and bookshelves cluttered with novels and family photos. The sight of our parents' old picture on the mantel made my throat close. Austin had made me pack mine away years ago, claiming they made him feel like an outsider. Seeing it again felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Riker wandered the space curiously. "Is this our new home?" he asked. "For now," I said, kneeling to his level. "Aunt Jean is letting us stay here until we find our own." His little brow furrowed. "As long as Daddy can't come." "He can't," Jean said firmly from the doorway. "He's not coming near you again." That night, after Riker finally drifted to sleep in Jean's spare room, I sat at the kitchen table with my sister. A stack of documents lay between us, my records, copies Andrea had sent over. Numbers stared back at me, withdrawals, transfers, payments to Claudia, proof of everything I had endured. Jean traced one line with her finger. "This isn't just survival, Mara. This is evidence. You've already done half the prosecutor's work for them." I laughed bitterly. I was just trying to keep my head above water. "Exactly," she said. "And in doing that, you built a bridge out." Her words echoed long after she went to bed. I sat alone, staring at the numbers, feeling something I hadn't dared let myself feel in years. Resolve. In the silence, I realized Austin hadn't just underestimated me. He'd underestimated the sun watching from the shadows, the sister who refused to give up, the neighbors who chose to speak. He thought control was permanent, but control had cracks, and we had found them. I turned off the kitchen light, the papers still spread like a map of my past, and whispered to the dark, "We're not done, not even close." The next morning began not with fear, but with the smell of coffee that didn't carry menace. Jean brewed it strong, the way she always had, and the simple act of her sliding a mug toward me felt like a small reclamation. No raised voices, no threats lurking in the steam, just warmth. Riker sat at the table with a bowl of cereal, his legs swinging, his bear propped on the chair beside him. He looked up at me with milk on his lip. "Mommy, are we going to court today?" "Not today, sweetheart," I said gently, wiping his mouth. "But soon. We'll tell the truth, and the judge will listen." Jean leaned on the counter, her expression tight. "Andrea called this morning. They found more in the truck. Hidden bank statements. Accounts you never knew about." My stomach sank, though the news wasn't unexpected. "How much?" "Enough to prove he's been lying about everything," Jean said. "Tens of thousands, maybe more. Deposits from his job he claimed he didn't have." I pressed my hands against the table, grounding myself. So, while I was working myself raw, while Claudia bled me with her emergencies, he was stashing money. Jean's eyes softened. Mara, this isn't just abuse, it's fraud, it's theft. The DA's office is already talking about serious prison time. Across the table, Riker looked between us. His voice was small, careful. Does that mean Daddy's never coming back? I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. It means Daddy can't hurt us anymore, ever again. His shoulders sagged with visible relief. Good. I don't want him back. The door buzzer startled us all. Jean answered, and a moment later, Andrea stepped inside with a folder tucked under her arm. She greeted Riker warmly before turning to me. We've secured protective orders. Neither Austin nor Claudia can contact you. We've also frozen the hidden accounts. That money is part of the case now. I blinked, overwhelmed. What happens to it? Eventually, Andrea said, restitution. It should come back to you. Jean's face lit up. Mara, do you hear that? You could finally breathe again. I wanted to believe it, but doubt crept in. Money won't fix the scars. No, Andrea agreed, her voice steady, but it can help you rebuild. And rebuild you will. Riker piped up again, his tone matter of fact. Mommy's really good with numbers. She'll fix everything. The faith in his voice broke me. I pulled him into my arms, burying my face in his hair. We'll fix it together, I whispered. Andrea laid the folder on the table. This is what we have so far. Photos, financial records, statements. Your son's testimony will be powerful, but your documentation, that's the nail in the coffin. I glanced at the folder, then at Riker, then at Jean. For years, evidence had been my silent lifeline, the thing that reminded me I wasn't imagining the nightmare. Now, it was my weapon. Andrea stood. We'll keep you updated daily. For now, focus on healing. She looked at Riker, and being a kid again. After she left, Jean touched the folder with reverence. You know what this is, don't you? It's not just a case file. It's the story of how you survived. I stared at the neat stack of papers, the photographs, the ledgers of pain turned into proof. For the first time, I felt something burn hotter than fear. Resolve. I pulled the folder closer. Then it's time to finish the story. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, sterile, expectant, like a place where lives were sorted into columns of guilty and not. My palms were damp as Jean and I walked through the metal detector, Riker holding my hand so tightly it was almost painful. He wore his best shirt, the one with buttons he always fumbled, but today he had managed them all. His small jaw was set with determination that reminded me achingly of my father. Reporters clustered outside, shouting questions I ignored. Words like abuse, fraud, and betrayal ricocheted in the air, but I kept my eyes forward. Inside, Andrea met us, her professional calm steadying me. Remember, she said quietly, you're not the one on trial. He is. Claudia is. This is your chance to be heard. We were ushered into the courtroom, where Austin sat in an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, his once carefully groomed hair limp and unwashed. The sight of him shrunk, reduced, almost pitiful, made my stomach twist. Claudia sat beside him, her pearls gone, her face pale and hollow. For years, they had looked untouchable, united in cruelty. Now they looked small. Austin's eyes found mine. He smirked, a ghost of his old arrogance. You can't win, that look said. But then his gaze slid to Riker, who met it with a glare so sharp it cut the smirk away. Austin blinked first. The judge entered, gavel striking, and the trial began. The prosecution laid out everything. Photographs of my injuries, financial records meticulously kept, screenshots from the secret phone. Each piece of evidence was a stone stacked on top of the last, building a wall neither Austin nor Claudia could climb. And then came the moment I dreaded most, Riker's testimony. The judge allowed a child advocate to sit beside him, but as he walked to the stand, my heart threatened to stop. He looked so small climbing into the chair, feet dangling above the floor. Yet when he raised his hand and swore to tell the truth, his voice was steady. Riker, the prosecutor said gently, can you tell us what you saw your daddy do? He glanced at me once, then spoke. He hurt my mommy, lots of times. He pushed her and grabbed her. He poured coffee on her head. Grandma laughed. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My throat tightened, but I held my chin high. The prosecutor continued softly. Did you ever try to help your mommy? Yes, Riker said. I took pictures of the bruises. I called 911 when he burned her. I told the police where to find the secret phone. Austin shifted, his face red, but the cuffs clinked when he moved. The defense attorney tried to rattle him. Riker, sometimes children misunderstand what they see. Are you sure you're remembering correctly? Riker's eyes narrowed. I'm sure. Daddy always told Mommy it was her fault, but I knew it wasn't. I saw everything. His words sliced through the courtroom like a blade. Even the judge's face softened with something like sorrow. When it was my turn to testify, my legs shook, but my voice held. I spoke of years spent in silence, of money drained into Claudia's pockets, of bruises hidden and hope eroded. I held nothing back. Every word felt like tearing out stitches, but with each truth, the wound began to breathe. By the end, the prosecution's case was unshakable. The jury's eyes told me they saw it too. When closing arguments ended, the judge called for recess before deliberation. I sank into the wooden bench, trembling. Jean wrapped an arm around my shoulders, whispering, "You did it. You both did." Across the room, Austin sat with his head in his hands, his arrogance finally gone. Claudia stared at the floor, lips moving in some silent prayer that would never be answered. Riker leaned against me, whispering, "Did we win, Mommy?" I kissed his forehead. "No matter what they decide, baby, we already did." The jury filed back into the courtroom after only 3 hours of deliberation. My stomach twisted with every step they took, each juror's expression carved from stone. Jean squeezed my hand until my knuckles ached. Riker pressed close on my other side, his little heartbeat thudding against my arm. The judge cleared his throat. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood, paper trembling slightly in her hands. "We have, Your Honor." I couldn't breathe. "On the charge of aggravated domestic assault," she read, "we find the defendant, Austin Peter, guilty." The words slammed into me like a wave. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to blink them away. "On the charges of financial fraud and coercion, guilty. On conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty." Each guilty was a hammer strike, shattering 6 years of silence. "And on the charge of accessory to domestic assault, we find the defendant, Claudia Peter, guilty. On conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty." Claudia gasped, her hands flying to her chest. Austin sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might break. For once, neither of them spoke. The judge's gavel struck. "Sentencing will proceed immediately." The prosecutor rose, voice steady. "Your Honor, the state requests the maximum sentence. The evidence demonstrates not only physical violence, but systemic financial exploitation and emotional abuse spanning years. The victim and her child deserve protection and justice." Austin's lawyer sputtered something about misunderstandings and family disputes, but his words rang hollow in the heavy silence. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Mr. Peter, your actions show a chilling pattern of control, violence, and deceit. You stole not only money, but years of peace from your wife and terrorized your child. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison." Austin's face drained of color. He turned to look at me, eyes burning with hatred. "You'll regret this, Mara," he hissed. I held his gaze. "No, I'll finally live." The judge shifted to Claudia. "Mrs. Peter, you aided and encouraged your son's crimes, profiting from his abuse. You are sentenced to 7 years." Claudia's mouth opened in shock, but no sound came. The guards moved swiftly, pulling both of them to their feet. Handcuffs clinked, chains rattled, and for the first time in years, I felt the air in my lungs expand fully. As they were led out, Riker leaned into me and whispered, "They can't hurt us anymore." I kissed his hair, tasting salt and hope. "Never again, baby, never again." The judge dismissed the court, but I barely heard. My sister was crying quietly beside me, the sound of release after years of helpless distance. I wrapped an arm around her, around my son, and realized we were no longer fragments orbiting Austin's gravity. We were free. When we stepped outside, reporters surged forward again, cameras flashing, microphones thrust out, voices shouted my name, demanded quotes, but I ignored them all. I bent to Riker's level, shielding him with my body. "Let's go home," I said softly. Jean hailed a cab, and as we pulled away from the courthouse, I looked back one last time. The building stood tall, impassive, but inside it had delivered something I once thought impossible: justice. I turned to Riker, who was gazing out the window, his reflection pale but determined. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes so much older than his 6 years. "That we're going to be okay, for real this time. And for the first time in years, I didn't doubt him. 3 months later, the seasons had shifted. Spring sunlight streamed through the windows of the new house I'd bought, a modest two-story with a small backyard where Riker could play without fear. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the halls, mingling with the aroma of bread baking in the oven. This place was ours, untouched by Austin's shadow, untouched by Claudia's demands. Riker sat on the floor with crayons, sketching a scene that made my chest ache with pride. A woman holding hands with a little boy, both smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. "It's us," he explained when he caught me looking. "And that's Aunt Jean. And that's our new dog when we get one." The casual certainty in his voice, that we had a future, that joy was normal again, felt like a gift I didn't deserve but clung to anyway. Jean bustled in with groceries, setting them on the counter. "Your business paperwork came," she said, handing me a manila envelope. "Looks like the boutique is officially yours." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Months ago, the idea of starting a business had seemed laughable, a dream I couldn't afford. Now, with restitution and hidden funds reclaimed, it was reality. "A place for women rebuilding their lives," I murmured. "Somewhere they can remember who they are." Jean smiled, "Just like you did." Before I could answer, Riker piped up. "Can I help at the store? I can fold clothes. I'm really good at folding." I laughed, pulling him into a hug. "You can be my #1 helper, but only after homework." His mock groan filled the room, light and innocent, the sound of childhood returning. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, dread curled in my stomach, a shadow of old fear. But I let it ring out. Austin's voice, Claudia's manipulation, none of it could touch us anymore. Their sentences had begun, and their hold on us had ended. Instead, I focused on the table before me. Jean's easy laughter, Riker's chatter about school, the simple meal we shared without tension. This was what freedom tasted like. Not grand gestures, but peace woven into the ordinary. Later, after Riker had fallen asleep clutching his bear, I stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street. For years, I had measured my life in bruises and balances, in silence and survival. Now I measured it in something new, beginnings. I whispered into the night, as if to seal it with the universe, "We're free, and we're never going back." Behind me, Jean's voice floated softly from the doorway. "The best revenge, Mara, is living well." I turned, smiling through tears. Then we're about to have the sweetest revenge of all. 5 years later, I stood in the same courthouse where my world had once collapsed and rebuilt. But this time, there were no shackles, no gavel strikes heavy with dread. Today was a celebration. The Community Service Awards ceremony had filled the chamber with warmth. Police officers in pressed uniforms, social workers in bright blouses, families applauding loudly enough to rattle the rafters. And at the center of it all stood Riker, now 11 years old, his hair neatly combed, his shoulders squared in a way that made him seem older than his years. He walked to the podium, small hands gripping the microphone, his voice carrying clear. "When I was little, my dad hurt my mom. I thought that was just how families worked. But my mom showed me that love isn't supposed to hurt. She showed me that you can be scared and still do the right thing." The audience fell silent, every ear straining toward his words. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "And sometimes the most important thing is helping someone else be brave." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in my chest. I pressed my hands together, tears slipping freely, while Jean beside me wiped her cheeks with a crumpled tissue. Afterward, Riker found me in the crowd, clutching the small plaque they had given him. He held it out proudly. "For both of us," he said, "because we were brave together." I pulled him into my arms, feeling his heartbeat steady against mine. "No, sweetheart," I whispered. "This one's yours. You saved us both." Later that evening, we drove home, our home, a house filled with laughter instead of shouting, warmth instead of fear. The boutique had grown into 2 locations and a thriving online store. Women rebuilding their lives came not just for clothes, but for community, for reminders that survival wasn't the end, it was the beginning. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the yard, Riker ran outside with our dog bounding at his heels. His laughter rose, clear and free, the sound of a boy who had learned strength the hardest way, but carried it gently. Inside, I placed his plaque beside a framed photograph of him on that podium, his face serious and bright. Next to it sat another frame, a faded copy of the arrest report, highlighting the section that read "Evidence provided by minor child." A reminder of the day my son found his voice, and by doing so, gave me back mine. Austin still sent letters from prison, sometimes apologetic, sometimes venomous. They went straight into the shredder unread. Claudia, released early for good behavior, moved to another state and faded into irrelevance. Their voices no longer mattered. The only voices that filled our home now were the ones that lifted us: Riker's laughter, Jean's gentle encouragement, the grateful words of women who walked out of my boutique smiling at their reflections. The best revenge wasn't bitterness or retribution. It was this, a life so full of love and purpose that there was no room left for anger. Austin had stolen 6 years from me, but in the end, he gave me something greater. The proof that I was stronger than I had ever believed, and that sometimes the smallest voices, like a 6-year-old boy with a mug of warm milk and courage bigger than the kitchen, can roar loud enough to change everything. And as I watched my son toss a ball to our dog under the fading sun, I whispered to myself the truth that had carried me through it all. We're free, and we're never going back.